Bear River Massacre. It was where hundreds of Native Americans were killed in 1863.
This is where our people lived. This is where our people wintered.
After a 4-hour attack, between 400 and 500 Shoshone men, women, and children were killed. But those who did live would have horrific memories to tell future generations.
A result of increasing tensions between settlers and the indigenous people here.
The site of one of the largest massacres of Native Americans in the history of our country.
The Cache Valley was the hunting grounds for the northwestern Shoshone. Known as Willow Valley to the Shoshone people, they fished, gathered their grain and grass seeds, as well as hunted small game and large like bison, elk, and deer. The mountain valley had attracted fur trappers. Jim Bridger and Jedediah Smith visited the region. It got its name Cache Valley. The trappers' practice of leaving stores of furs and goods in a cache. Hence the name Cache Valley. The valley was also used as a base when the trappers would hunt the surrounding mountain ranges. All the trappers in the area had been so impressed by the region that they recommended to Brigham Young that he consider the valley as the location for his settlement for the Mormon pioneers. Instead, Young chose the Salt Lake Valley. Mormon settlers did move to the Cache Valley later on. As early as July 31st, 1847, a 20-man delegation of Shoshone met with the Mormons to discuss their land claims in northern Utah. The California and Oregon trails were established. This brought the Shoshone people to regular contact with the white settlers, as well as the founding of Salt Lake City in 1847. Many white settlers were moving westward. By 1856, white Americans had established their first permanent settlement along with farms in the Cache Valley, Wellsville, Utah. Brigham Young made it a policy that Mormon settlers should have friendly relations with the Native American tribes in the area. He was quoted as saying that he encouraged Mormons to feed them rather than fight them. Despite this, the settlers in the area were consuming a vast amount of food resources in the region and taking over more area. This pushed the Shoshone into areas with less food and resources. In 1856, Surveyor General of the Territory of Utah was told by the local Shoshone that the Mormons had used so much of the Cache Valley that the once abundant game no longer appeared. The foraging and hunting from western settlers traveling across the trails also took many resources away from the local population. The Superintendent of Indian Affairs for the Territory of Utah, Jacob Forney, wrote this in 1859.
The Indians have become impoverished by the introduction of the white population.
He recommended an Indian reservation be established in the Cache Valley to protect resources for the Shoshone. His supervisors at the United States Department of the Interior did not listen to his concerns. The Shoshone began to starve, and they were desperate for food and resources. They began to attack farms and cattle ranches for supplies, not only for revenge, but for survival. In 1862, Utah Territorial Superintendent of Indian Affairs, James Duane Doty, spent 4 days in the Cache Valley. He reported this.
The Indians have been in great numbers, in a starving and destitute condition. No provisions having been made for them, either as to clothing or provisions by my predecessors. The Indians' condition was such with the prospect that they would rob mail stations to sustain life.
He brought supplies of food and handed it out. He suggested that the Shoshone be given livestock to enable them to become herders instead of being beggars. Gold was discovered on Grasshopper Creek in southwest Montana on July 28, 1862 by John White. A migration trail and supply train went right through the middle of the Cache Valley, between the mining camp and Salt Lake City, because Salt Lake City was the closest significant trading source for food and goods in the area, causing more white settlers and wagon trains to pass through the Shoshone hunting grounds. When the American Civil War began, President Abraham Lincoln did not want California to be cut off from the rest of the Union. Lincoln and the War Department did not trust the Mormons of the Utah Territory to remain loyal to the Union, despite Young's telegrams and assurances that they would. Lincoln ordered several regiments to be raised from the population of California to protect mail routes and the communication lines of the West. The Utah War and Mountain Meadows Massacre were fresh in the mind of Lincoln's war planners. They were worried that the Mormon militia might only answer to Young and not to the federal government. Colonel Patrick Edward Connor was in command of the 3rd California Voluntary Infantry Regiment. He was ordered by the Department of War to move his men to Utah to protect the overland mail route, as well as to keep peace in Utah. When the 3rd California arrived in Utah, Colonel Patrick Edward Connor established Camp Douglas as a base of operations for his unit. It was within a few miles of the Great Salt Lake City. Several incidents occurred in the summer and fall of 1862. The country's attention was focused on the Civil War in the East, which led to the incidents becoming overlooked. A resident of Summit Creek, now called Smithfield, noticed one of his horses were missing. He accused a young Shoshone that was fishing nearby the Summit Creek of stealing his horse. Robert Thornley, the first resident of Summit Creek, defended the young Shoshone and testified for him. But even with his support, a local jury convicted and hanged him for stealing the horse. Local history has recorded his name as Pugwany. Later information reveals that Pugwany is a Shoshone word for fish. The young Indian was the son of local Shoshone chief. After a few days, the Shoshone retaliated by killing a few young men of the Merrill family who were out gathering wood in a nearby canyon. In the summer of 1859, a settler company of around 19 people from Michigan were traveling on the Oregon Trail near Fort Hall. They were attacked at night by people they assumed were Shoshone. Many of the settlers were killed by gunfire. The survivors of the company took refuge along the Portneuf River. They hid among the willow trees for 3 days until Lieutenant Livingston of Fort Walla Walla, who was leading a company of dragoons, met the survivors. He investigated the incident and reported on the brutality. According to the Desert News from September 21, 1859, a detachment of Lieutenant Livingston's dragoons found 5 dead bodies at the scene of the massacre who were mangled. A girl of only 5 years old had her ears cut off, her eyes gouged out, and both legs amputated at the knee, and by all appearances was made to walk on her stumps. December 4, 1862, Colonel Connor sent Major McGarry on an expedition to the Cache Valley to recover stolen livestock from the Indians. The Shoshone fled at the sight of the troops. They crossed a ferry on the Bear River, and when they crossed, they cut the ropes on the ferry to prevent the military from following behind. McGarry safely got his men across, but he had to lead the horses. 4 warriors were captured and held for ransom, although they did not appear related to the theft. McGarry ordered that the men would be shot if the livestock was not delivered the next day at noon. The Shoshone chiefs moved their people further north into the Cache Valley. The captives were executed as promised, and their bodies dumped into the Bear River. A.H. Conover, who was an operator of a Montana Trail freight hauling service between the mining camps of Salt Lake City, was attacked by Shoshone warriors who killed 2 men accompanying him, George Clayton and Henry Bean. When he arrived in Salt Lake City, he told reporters that the Indians were determined to avenge blood of their comrades killed by Major Gary and his soldiers. He said the Shoshone intended to kill every white man they should meet on the north side of the Bear River until they should be fully avenged. The Shoshone attacked a group of 8 miners on the Montana Trail. The miners came within 2 miles of the Shoshone winter camp, north of Franklin. They had missed the turn and ended up lost on the western side of the Bear River. Unable to cross due to the deep water level, the 3 men swam across to Richmond to get provisions and a guide from the settlers. Before they returned, the other 5 men were attacked by the Indians. John Henry Smith of Walla Walla and some horses were killed. When the Richmond people returned with the advance party, John Smith's body was recovered and he was buried in Richmond City Cemetery. The miners who survived reached Salt Lake City. William Bevins testified and swore an affidavit describing Smith's murder. He also reported 10 miners en route to the city had been killed 3 days before this incident. John F. Kenney issued a warrant for the arrest of the chiefs, Bear Hunter, Sandpitch, and Sagwitch. He ordered the territory marshal to get the assistance from Colonel Connor for a military force to make the arrest of the guilty Indians. Due to such reports, Connor was ready to mount an expedition against the Shoshone. He reported to the U.S. War Department before the engagement.
I have the honor to report that from information received from various sources of the encampment of a large body of Indians on Bear River, in Utah Territory, 140 miles north of this point, who had settlements in this valley to the Beaver Head Mines, east of the Rocky Mountains, and being satisfied that they were a part of the same band who had been murdering immigrants on the overland mail route for the last 15 years, and the principal actors and leaders in the horrid massacres of the past summer, I determined, although the season was unfavorable to an expedition in consequence of the cold weather and deep snow, to chastise them if possible.
The soldiers stationed at Fort Douglas were itching for a fight, as well as having discipline problems. Among the soldiers, there was a minor mutiny. Also, the soldiers were filing a joint petition by most of the California volunteers who requested to withhold over $30,000 of their paychecks for the sole purpose of paying for naval passage to the eastern states, to serve their country in shooting traitors instead of eating rations and freezing to death around a sagebrush fire. They said that they would gladly pay this money for the privilege of going to the Potomac and getting shot. The War Department denied their request. In January 1863, soldiers at Fort Douglas were preparing for an expedition, traveling north to the Shoshone. Colonel Connor also wanted to keep his expedition secret, hoping to make a surprise attack on the Shoshone when he arrived. His command was to separate into 2 detachments that would come together from time to time on their journey to the Cache Valley. His main concern was to avoid problems that McGarry had faced on his earlier actions, where the Shoshone had moved and scattered even before his troops could arrive. George Smith, in the official journal history of the LDS Church, wrote this:
It is said that Colonel Connor is determined to exterminate the Indians who have been killing the immigrants on the route to the gold mines in Washington Territory. Small detachments have been leaving for the north for several days. If the present expedition copies the doings of the other that preceded it, it will result in catching some friendly Indians, murdering them, and letting the guilty scamps remain undisturbed in their mountain haunts.
The Desert News, in an editorial, wrote this:
With ordinary good luck, the volunteers will wipe them out. We wish this community rid of all such parties, and if Colonel Connor be successful in reaching that bastard class of humans who play with the lives of the peaceable and law-abiding citizens in this way, we shall be pleased to acknowledge our obligations.
The first group to leave Fort Douglas was 40 men of K Company of the 3rd Regiment California Volunteer Infantry, commanded by Captain Samuel Hoyt, accompanied by 15 baggage wagons and 2 mountain howitzers. Totaling 80 soldiers, they left on January 22, 1863. The second group was 220 cavalry led by Connor himself, with his aides and 50 men, each from companies A, H, K, and M. Of the 2nd Regiment of Cavalry California Volunteers, they left on January 25th. Connor ordered each man to carry 40 rounds of rifle ammunition and 30 rounds of pistol ammunition, totaling nearly 16,000 rounds for the campaign. In addition to 200 rounds of artillery were brought in for the howitzers. And as part of the deception, the cavalry were to travel at night while the infantry moved during the day. Former U.S. Marshal and Mormon scout Orrin Porter Rockwell accompanied Connor. Captain Hoyt's infantry arrived near the town of Franklin on the evening of January 28, 1863. They spotted 3 Shoshone who were trying to get food supplies from the settlers in the town. They received 9 bushels of wheat and 3 sacks. William Hall, the settler who was trading with the Shoshone, later wrote,
We had 2 of the 3 horses loaded, having put 3 bushels on each horse. when I looked up and saw the soldiers approaching from the south. I said to the Indian boys, "Here comes the Taquashes," Shoshone for U.S. soldiers. "Maybe you will all be killed." They answered, "Maybe the Taquashes will be killed too." But not waiting for the third horse to be loaded, they quickly jumped upon their horses and led the 3 horses away, disappearing in the distance.
The 3 sacks of grain were found by the 3rd California Volunteers during their advance on the next day. It had been dropped by the Indians in their attempt to get back to their camp. Colonel Connor met with Hoyt that evening with orders to begin moving at about 1 a.m. the next morning for a surprise attack, but an attempt to get local settlers to act as a scout for the immediate area led to the actual advance waiting till 3 a.m. This military action occurred on the coldest times of the year in the Cache Valley. Local settlers said that it was unseasonably cold, even for northern Utah, as it may have been as cold as -20 degrees Fahrenheit on the morning of the 29th. When the attack began, several soldiers had come down with frostbite and other cold injuries. The 3rd Volunteers were only about 2/3 of their strength compared to when they had left Fort Douglas. Among the rations issued to the soldiers for the campaign was a ration of whiskey. Held in a canteen, several soldiers noted that the whiskey had frozen solid the night before the attack. The chiefs knew of the potential for conflict with Colonel Connor's soldiers. Some preparations were made. Most of it involved gathering food from the surrounding settlements. The majority of firearms the Shoshone had at the time of the attack had been captured in minor skirmishes. Their firearms were acquired by fur trappers, white settlers, other Native American tribes, or antiques that had been handed down generation to generation over the years. Unlike the California Volunteers, their weapons were not standardized or well built at all. Bear Hunter and the other chiefs did make some defensive arrangements around the encampment, as well as selecting a defensible position in the first place. They used willow branches that had been woven into makeshift screens, hiding the position and number of the Shoshone. They had also dug rifle pits along the eastern back of the Beaver Creek in the Bear River. At the time, the arrest warrant was issued by Justice Kinney. Chief Sagwitch, who was named in the warrant, was also in Salt Lake City, trying to negotiate peace. A conversation recorded by the Sacramento Union said that the prophet, Brigham Young, had told Chief Sagwitch, "The Mormon people have suffered enough from the Shoshone in Cache Valley, and that if more blood were spilled, the Mormons might just pitch in and help the troops." It appears the deception by Connor to hide the true number of soldiers involved in the confrontation was successful. The Shoshone were not even anticipating a direct military engagement with the soldiers. Instead, they were preparing for a negotiated settlement where the chiefs would be able to talk with the officers of the U.S. Army and try to come to an understanding. Major McGarry and the 1st Cavalry units of the 2nd Regiment California Volunteer Cavalry arrived at the massacre scene at 6 a.m., just as the sun shined over the mountains. Due to the extreme weather conditions, the deep snow, and the chilling -20-degree cold, it took time for Connor to organize his soldiers into battle lines. The artillery had never arrived. They were caught in a snowdrift 6 miles from the encampment. Chief Sagwitch wrote this about the approach of the troops just before the first shot was fired. "Look like there is something up on the ridge there. Look like a cloud. Maybe it is steam come from a horse. Maybe that's them soldiers they were talking about." The camp lay in a dry ravine, about 40 feet wide, and it was shielded by 12-foot embankments, in which the Indians had cut firing steps. About 2/3 of the command succeeded in fording the ice-choked Bear River. While Connor tried to hasten the crossing, Major McGarry dismounted his troops and launched a frontal attack. But he was soon overwhelmed. With the return gunfire from the Shoshone, the California Volunteers suffered most of their direct combat-related casualties during this first assault. Connor assumed control and he shifted tactics. By sending in flanking parties to attack the village from the sides and behind, he directed a line of infantry to block any attempt by the Indians to flee from the attack. Heavy fire rained down into the lodges below. With their escape blocked, the Shoshone fought desperately in their positions until they were slain, sometimes in hand-to-hand combat. The ones who broke free were shot while swimming in the icy river. After about 2 hours, the Shoshone had run out of ammunition. According to some later reports, some of the Indians were trying to cast lead ammunition during the middle of the battle and died with their molds in their hands. Bear Hunter was killed. Some reports said that he was among those that were casting lead bullets. The California Volunteers suffered 14 soldiers killed and 49 wounded, 7 mortally, of whom 1 officer and 6 men died, and 75 men suffered frostbitten feet. After the officers concluded the battle was over, they returned with the soldiers to their temporary encampment near Franklin. The Franklin residents opened their homes to the wounded soldiers that night. They brought blankets and hay to the church to protect the other soldiers from the bitter cold. Colonel Connor hired local men to use sleighs to bring wounded men back to Salt Lake City. He estimated his forces killed more than 224 out of the 300 warriors. He reported capturing 175 horses and some arms and destroying 70 lodges, and a large quantity of stored wheat in the winter supplies. He left a small quantity of wheat on the field for the 160 captured women and children. The death toll was large, but some Shoshone survived. Chief Sagwitch gathered survivors to keep his community alive. He was shot twice in the hand, and he tried to escape on horseback, only to have the horse shot out from under him. He went to the ravine and escaped to the Bear River near a hot spring, where he floated under some brush until nightfall. His son, Bessup Timbu, was shot 7 times, but he survived, and he was rescued by his family members. Some of the other survivors hid in the willow brush of the Bear River and tried to act as if they were dead. Sagwitch and the other survivors retrieved the wounded and built a fire to keep them warm. There was a large difference between the number of Indians reported killed by Connor and the number counted by the citizens of Franklin, the later being much larger. The settlers also claim the number of surviving women and children to be much fewer than what Connor claimed. In his autobiography in 1911, Danish immigrant Hans Jaspersen claimed to have walked among the bodies and encountered 493 dead. In 1918, Sagwitch's son said half of those present got away and 156 were killed. He went on to say 2 of his brothers and his sister-in-law lived. This conflict marked the final significant influence of the Shoshone on the Cache Valley and the surrounding area. Friction between the Mormons and Colonel Connor continued for many more years, with the accusations of harassment of non-Mormons in the Utah Territory and criticisms by Mormons of Connor's attempts to bring mining industry into Utah. Chief Sagwitch and many members of his band allied with the Mormons. They were baptized and joined the LDS Church. According to newspaper articles, Colonel Connor and the California Volunteers were treated as heroes when they arrived at Fort Douglas, and in their community in California, Connor was promoted to the permanent rank of Brigadier General, and he was given a brevet promotion shortly afterwards to the rank of Major General. Connor campaigned against Native Americans in the West for the remainder of the Civil War, leading the Powder River expedition against the Sioux and Cheyenne. And that is the Bear River Massacre. So thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoyed, and we will see you on the next. Peace.